Okay, we're going to look at what is known as trait theory and then a few other modern approaches to understanding personality. And so here we go. The value of trait theories is that they provide a way that we can quantitatively describe and compare traits across different people and different circumstances. And it actually gives us an ability to finally accurately measure traits and personality. And so what trait theory does is it suggests that there are certain traits that are part of a person that are not environmentally dependent. That is, that there's some genetic reason for this. And we each have traits to some degree or another. So it's not like you're completely absent or completely missing one trait. It exists, but maybe in different degrees than it may exist in somebody else. And that's the big thing behind trait theory, is that we all possess these traits in some capacity, and how much that is largely based off genetics. There is some experience, but a lot of it is inheritance rather than experience. And so that is where trait theory comes into play. And they say that there's what's called the big five personality traits. And it's basically like a spectrum, if you will, for each trait. You have introversion to extroversion, right? So that's someone who's self-contained versus wanting to be around others. You have neuroticism versus stability. So that is kind of the way they perceive the world, and neurotic tendencies tend to be like OCD and just kind of anxiety-ridden. Agreeableness and antagonism, whether or not you're easy to get along with or not. Within that, again, the opposite is is antagonism, where you don't get along with people. Then you have conscientiousness versus undirectedness, and conscientiousness is your ability to kind of organize yourself and be self-motivated and disciplined, and undirectedness is when you're just kind of floating around, not sure what's going on. And then there's openness versus non-openness. Like, are you willing to try new things, or are you fixed in your perceptions and ways of doing things? And we all fall on those scales somewhere. Now, these big five personalities are a recent measurement, and they're not exact, and they're not the only way to look at personality. There's others that have identified something like 116 traits. Others have ended up at 17. But this big five personality traits is kind of an interesting way of looking at it. In terms of other trait theorists, we have Hans Eysenck, and he develops the personal inventory, the Eysenck personal inventory, and that's designed to examine personalities based off traits that people have. And he argues that there's this hierarchy of traits where many small physical traits and other personality traits are derived from a smaller number of higher order traits. So you start with extrovert or introvert, and then from there you get these other small traits that branch off that in kind of an upside down pyramid shape, or a regular pyramid shape. So he says that we inherit this through our genes, and that then plays an influence on who we are in our personality. And then kind of an odd thing, he focuses on the introversion and extroversion, and at the end of the day, he thinks that people who are introverts could be more easily conditioned using operant conditioning or other types of conditioning, because they have higher levels of arousability. They are more susceptible to arousal, or they're more likely to experience high levels of that. And so he suggests that this then is a good way to condition them, because they are more satisfied and more excited about their rewards. In terms of looking at the genetics aspect of it, research recently has suggested that there is a link between genes and personality, and they've used twin studies in order to make this work, because that's the best way to understand genetics. And so the twin studies have suggested that identical twins have personalities that are very similar, more so than fraternal twins. And then, of course, they looked at twins reared apart to make sure that they were getting actual genes and not environment. And so that is the the big debate, right? Is how much is nature versus nurture. And so it turns out that our current consensus, or the current thought, is that the heritability of each trait is approximately 50%. So in terms of personality, it's about 50% of what you are is as a result of your genes, and the rest is then some other combination of environment. And then in terms of looking at that big five traits, there are some evolutionary psychologists who argue that those stand out to us and are easy for us to see because there are adaptive implications to them. And then they start to look at the way human society has developed and expanded over the millennia. And what they've recognized is that we are social animals and we live in groups. And so these groups tend to, or these traits tend to help us understand how grouping will work and which individuals will thrive in a group setting. And so they represent what is best for the group. In terms of looking at some other modern concepts on personality, one of the big pushes right now is to understand narcissism. And narcissism is a personality trait, and if it gets, so we're all, some level, we have some of this, and it's marked by inflated sense of importance, a need for attention, sense of entitlement, and a tendency to exploit others. And more recently, the American Psychological Association has diagnosed narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, as a true psychological disorder. And the four key components to NPD are this over sense of importance, this grandiose sense of importance, a need for constant attention, not just a need for attention, but a constant need for attention, an inability to handle criticism, and then a sense of entitlement, that they're deserving of things. And so this narcissistic personality disorder manifests itself in about 3 to 5% of the population, but given the age we live in terms of social media and instant gratification, there is a belief that narcissism may actually be trending up, and that it may be a personality trait that is becoming more and more common genetically. And then also this shows the environmental impact and the impact that the environment and the society around us can have. And so narcissism is becoming a little more commonplace. Narcissists have a self-concept that is highly positive. They think very, very highly of themselves. But despite that, they're very insecure in their self-concept. So they're constantly feeling threatened. And again, this gets to that sense of entitlement and an inability to deal with criticism. Narcissists at first tend to be very welcomed and enjoyed because they know how to kind of pander to others, they can exploit others, they feel like they're important. They kind of come in with this confidence and, drive the group. But after a while, as people spend more and more time with them, narcissists are very much disliked by groups because of the taxing nature of someone who always needs attention, who doesn't change because they're unable to deal with criticisms, and think that they're the most important person in the world. And people don't want to be around that because that's annoying. And those types of people tend to rub, eventually, people the wrong way. Another new thought in personality and dealing with self-esteem is something called the terror management theory. And it's designed to really understand why people need self-esteem. And so terror management theory basically says that there is an ever-present conflict between the preservation instincts of humans, our desire to live, and the fact that we as humans with a well-developed brain and cognitive awareness recognize the inevitability of death. And this causes internal conflict and what they call terror. And the argument made by people who subscribe to the terror management theory is that the humans deal with this terror, or this idea of conflict and this inevitability of death, through culture. And our culture helps provide us worldviews and ways in which we can deal with this impending death in a way that's not as intimidating for us, and in a way that provides us purpose and meaning. And so culture provides a worldview that solves this existential crisis. Like, I'm eventually going to die at some point, and if my culture can attribute meaning to it, then that inevitability of death is not so scary. And it does that through rituals, it does that through religion, it does that through families, it does that through language, it does that through history, through various things. And how this ties into self-esteem is this idea that this sense of personal worth and self-esteem is very, very, very much dependent on where you fit into your cultural worldview. So if you believe that your culture values hardworking and dedicated, and you work hard, then you feel that your culture will honor you, and you are living up to the purposes of your culture, and thus that impending death is not looming as large, because you believe you are fulfilling the duties of your culture and your purpose here on Earth. And so self-esteem functions as a way to create a buffer zone and a barrier between anxiety of death and the reality of what is life. And so essentially terror management theory says that culture and self-esteem prevent people from confronting this awareness that they are destined to die at some point. It gives them, in many ways, purpose, but it gives them an ability to manage the terror they face about death. And this has been supported by a lot of research on something called mortality salience. And what this is mortality salience is how much your own mortality is on your mind. Like, are you thinking about your inevitable death? And it's a degree spectrum, right? Like, how much are you thinking about that? Are you thinking about this moment? Were you thinking about it recently? Yada, yada. And so the way that they do these mortality salience research is they ask people to think about their own future death. And what they find is that as they ask people about that, then these people engage in behaviors that strengthen their ties to their culture and boost their self-esteem. So when you think about your own death, you are more likely to become attached to your culture. You begin to think about your own self-esteem and engage in behaviors that would then support that. And this drives people to not only try to boost their self-esteem, but to defend their cultural worldview in the face of what they perceive as opposition, or even if there's no opposition there, they defend it in order to protect themselves. So this, in various studies, has led to people handing out worse penalties for those who break the law or some other moral taboo that their culture would disapprove of, respond negatively towards people who are critical of their country, show more respect for icons like the flag, the anthems, institutions, those sorts of things. It leads people to view people of different religions or ethnic backgrounds more negatively. It creates more stereotyping and then even more aggressive behavior towards people with different political views. So what we see is that truly in a worst case scenario, this concept of relying on culture to offset our fear of the inevitability of death can lead us to create a defense mechanism that leads to prejudice and aggression and an insistence that our culture is superior to those of other cultures, and that we have some sort of exceptionalism that makes our culture and our belief system acceptable. And that makes us feel as if we have purpose, and thus protects us from that terror of the inevitability of our death. And so the terror management theory, to kind of wrap that up, because it ties back in with that mortality salience, that just kind of supports this argument, is it can be used to explain the current excessive materialism we see as a way of people boosting their self-esteem. Their culture tells them the more things they get, the better they are. And so they're acquiring more stuff in an effort to boost self-esteem in order to match the cultural worldview that they think they're supposed to have. And we see that these defense mechanisms in terror management theory occur when death anxiety appears in the conscious awareness. So we're not constantly thinking about it, but if for whatever reason our own death comes to mind, or we're reminded of it, or we have a near-death experience, or anything of that sort, we have these automatic and subconscious responses that lead us to defend our culture, because that's what we use in order to insulate ourselves and protect ourselves from our impending death. So that's how people have started looking a little bit more deeply into this idea of self-esteem and culture and how it can affect our personality.